For years, archaeologists and historians agreed that beer was born with the development of agriculture, around 8,000 years before our era. It makes sense, it's not wine, which requires cultivating grapes. The base of beer is just grains, like barley, wheat, or spelt. So, where there are the first cereal crops, there are the first beers. However, in 2018, Stanford University announced a discovery at an Israeli archaeological site. In the Raquefet Cave, located in the north of the country, pottery and mortar remnants revealed traces of fermented barley. But these date back to between 13,000 and 11,700 years before our era, much earlier than previously thought. This is the oldest known trace of an alcoholic beverage in the world, and it coincides with the oldest bread making, found in Jordan and dating back 14,400 years. What we see here are still undomesticated grains, so we're not yet talking about agriculture. Yet, humans were already learning to process them, to cook or ferment them. This might be what ended nomadism and led to the birth of a new sedentary lifestyle. We still have to wait for the Sumerian civilization, around the 4th millennium BCE, for beer to truly enter history. The first written mentions of beer are found on clay tablets from the city of Uruk, in present-day Iraq. These administrative documents were used to manage the distribution of beer from warehouses. But what kind of beer are we talking about? The Sumerians called it sakaru, and it was under the protection of Ninkasi, the goddess of beer. This product always had the same base, a baked bread cake, then crushed and crumbled into water. Quite simple, and yet, there are 19 different recipes. Depending on the desired taste, and especially the social class of the customer, one could choose barley or spelt bread, add expensive and sweet ingredients like dates or honey, or spices and aromatic plants like cinnamon, cardamom, coriander, pepper, etc. Then you just have to brew it all, let it rest. And naturally, it ferments. So it's nothing like your golden, filtered, translucent beer. Sakaru is almost a kind of liquid bread, a slightly acidic, very nourishing flavored soup. It smells like a cereal dish, thought of as an alternative to not always drinkable water. It is consumed daily to regain strength in families, among kings and priests, as well as workers and farmers. It's eaten at any age, regardless of gender and social condition. It's understandable why the goddess Ninkasi was seen as a true and nourisher. Moreover, sakaru was brewed exclusively by women. It held a major place in Sumerian society, in trade, and even at the heart of religious rituals. But we don't know much more, as the Sumerians mainly left written records. However, if you want well-preserved archaeological evidence, you just need to go to Egypt. Monuments, frescoes, papyri, and even in tombs. Beer is found everywhere in Egypt, where it was made from as early as 3,500 BCE. Greek and Roman travelers who were more fond of wine sometimes disparagingly mentioned this a barley wine that the Egyptians called azythum. Except that once again, the single word azythum covers several recipes. Henekit, tenemu, or comet, all these drinks are made from barley, slightly alcoholic, and change in composition depending on the use. The pharaohs themselves had their own beer, brewed by a royal brewer. And each time, we're talking about industrial-scale production. In February 2021, archaeologists discovered actual beer factories, like the brewery at Abydos, in southern Egypt, capable of producing up to 22,400 liters of zythum at once. Not surprising, considering that Abydos is a sacred land, dedicated to Osiris, the protector god of beer producers. Even during the reign of Ramses II, in the 7th century BCE, a papyrus indicates that he reserved 400,000 units of beer for offerings to a single temple, that of Ammonius. We're talking about 1.2 million liters of zythum. With such a production rate, it's no wonder that ancient prehistoric beer, which contributed to sedentarization, eventually experienced a golden age in the largest cities. It became commercialized, found all around the Mediterranean basin, particularly shining in ancient Europe. Be careful, don't make me say that Europeans waited for the Egyptians to drink beer. Moreover, in the cave of Kensadurni in Spain, traces of malted and fermented barley dating from the 4th millennium BCE have been found, thus contemporaneous with Sumerian sakaru. However, it's true that researchers only have this and other archaeological remains, like pottery and human installations, to trace this early alcohol. For written sources confirming that it's indeed beer, we have to wait until the 3rd century BCE. And it gets even better in the 1st century BCE, when Roman conquest pacifies Gaul, allowing more and more erudite travelers to talk about Gallic beer. At that time, all sorts of Greek and Roman travelers began to speak of the famous Celtic beer, Pythias of Marseille, Cato, Pliny the Elder, but also Julius Caesar himself. They then spoke of cervesia, a Latin word for the Gaulish beer. It too was protected by a god, Sucellus. But it also had several names. The term cervesia does not honor all the types and qualities of Celtic beers. The poorest had to settle for a very modest product, korma or kermi. But the wealthiest enjoyed purinos instead. And purinos is not manure, it's a delicious wheat beer, full of savory honey. But then, what changed between the Sumerians and the Gauls? Well, a crucial step, malting. Basically, you germinate then heat the grain, obtaining a much better product. Of course, the Gauls were not expert chemists in yeasts, invisible to the naked eye, and which they didn't even know about. And that's the craziest part. Through trial and error, they saw how fermentation worked better, but they had no idea why. So, we imagine they must have drunk a lot of rather gross stuff before getting it right. But the gourmet Gaul eventually became a true beer expert. Moreover, they added a secret ingredient, grut. It's a blend of aromatic plants, thyme, bay leaf, tarragon, coriander, sage, oregano, basil, etc., to add flavor. But besides the taste, beer had many advantages. It was easy to make, and each household could brew it daily. And it was cheap, considering it was made of cereals and water. Finally, it was very nourishing, a true liquid bread easy to transport and store. Hence the huge success of beer as a soldier's drink. Coincidentally, the main Gallo-Roman brewing sites at Vindolanda in England and Regensburg in Germany were actually located inside legionary camps. But the Gallo-Roman period also marks a historical parenthesis, during which the upper classes preferred wine and snubbed beer. This didn't last long, because after the fall of the empire, the Germanic peoples who took over had exactly the same relationship to beer as the Gauls before them. This drink was therefore brewed daily by women throughout the Middle Ages, until the 15th century. But moreover, as early as the 8th century, the opportunity was seized to produce large quantities for profit. At first, the church didn't view all this very favorably. Wasn't the pagan beer an enemy of the good Christian wine? But this mistrust didn't last long, as the religious communities in the north of the country eventually incorporated beer production into their economy. Breweries even appeared within abbeys from the 8th century, and until the 11th century, Cambay in general multiplied rapidly. When Charlemagne standardized religious establishments in 802, he even imposed the presence of a brewery in every abbey. Monastic breweries, in particular, were favored by royal power, which saw them as a means of controlling alcohol production. And thus, in the 10th century, the grut rite appeared. Bishoprics could now tax the gruts, the famous aromatic bouquets of brewers. The other advantage is that the monk is a man of knowledge. He reads Greek and Latin. And so, he could rediscover ancient recipes, work on them, and thus produce a better quality beer. As a result, it eventually found its way to the tables of dukes and kings. We can say that the Roman disdain truly belonged to the past. Abbey beer launches several innovations. In the 12th century, German abbess Hildegard of Bingen reveals that hops preserve better than traditional grut. It is then replaced, especially since this plant has more bitterness and aroma. In the 15th century, Bavarian abbeys explore bottom fermentation, which further improves the preservation and stability of beer. But it is not until the Industrial Revolution that this process is truly mastered. The Middle Ages also see the birth of an official profession, that of the cervoiser, which appears in Amiens in the 12th century and gains status in Paris in the 13th century. Artisanal and rural brewing declines in favor of professional brewing, with authorities regulating production and granting royal privileges to brewers. Ordinances govern the authorized ingredients, production season, and product quality. For example, in 1516, The Reinheitsgebot, the Bavarian beer purity law by Duke Wilhelm IV, stipulates that the authorized ingredients for brewing beer are barley, water, and hops. This reserved wheat and spelt for bread. Brewing in the hot season is also prohibited to avoid bacterial contamination. Finally, the role of inspector, known as a swart in the north and Bierkiezer in Alsace, allows for entire batches to be destroyed if deemed unfit for consumption. This forms a substantial legal framework. However, technically, nothing changes until modern times. The only difference is that wooden tools become metal. But the Industrial Revolution eventually transforms the brewing industry. In 1792, royal privileges and professional brewer corporations are abolished. Many abbeys and their breweries are destroyed. Fortunately, secular breweries, which already existed, multiplied to replace them throughout the country. This is timely, as from 1765 to 1788, the Scotsman James Watt perfects the steam engine and makes it accessible to industries. It takes until the 1830s for these first engines to really spread to French breweries, bringing all their advantages. From the 1840s to 1850s, thousands of patents flourish, modernizing and improving brewery efficiency. To give you some examples, manual brewing by numerous workers is replaced by mechanical brewing done by the vageur, a mechanical arm operated by steam, gears, and belts. The workforce is drastically reduced, and the profession evolves, with workers becoming more like engineers managing the machines. The constantly running machine saves time, as does the replacement of horses with trains, enabling longer and faster deliveries. In 1856, Jean-Louis Baudelot from Ardennes invents the tubular cooler, which cools a batch of 25,000 liters in just 1.5 hours. Thus, there is no need to avoid the hot season. Brewing can now occur year-round. In 1873, the Velton Brewery in Marseille inaugurates the first electric motor in the industry. Step by step, all stages become automated, including malting, filtering, brewing, refrigeration, and even bottling. In addition to all these technologies, science also progresses. Think of Louis Pasteur and his famous pasteurization. When this patent is issued in 1865, we are far from the time of the first Gallic experiments. We know about yeasts, these microscopic living organisms that enable fermentation but also die over time. Pasteur's work allows for better preservation of beers and wines. Danish scientist Emil Christian Hansen's work enables the reproduction of a single yeast strain. Where quality could once vary greatly from batch to batch, this is no longer the case. It marks the beginning of beer standardization. The bottom fermentation discovered in the Middle Ages finally becomes usable. This produces very light, fresh, and bubbly beers. The old top-fermented beer of antiquity is completely outclassed. The temple of this new trend, starting in 1842, is the city of Pilsen in the Czech Republic. There they brew Pilsner, or Pils, a symbol of modernity. To maintain this monopoly, they process even more volume, expand, and grow, entering total industrialization. Ultimately, the Industrial Revolution truly brought about the golden age of French brewing. In 1910, the country has more than 3,300 breweries. The vast majority, located in the north, remain small family businesses brewing traditionally. Conversely, the eastern departments, influenced by Germanic practices and the exodus of Alsatian brewers, host only a few dozen breweries, but they are industrial giants. Some can exceed 20 million liters per year, which is no small feat. By far, Meurthe-et-Moselle is the most industrialized department in France. But World War I puts a huge stop to all this prosperity. In 4 years, nearly 2,000 breweries are wiped off the map, either by combat or due to lack of personnel and raw materials. Another 900 suffer the same fate during World War II. We're talking about 88% of the breweries. This figure also includes the effects of the fierce competition we've already discussed. To prosper, what better than acquiring your neighbor? But in the 2000s, there's a big American roller coaster. The United States catches the home brewing virus, the practice of brewing at home for oneself. Some enthusiasts become passionate, then independent brewers, microbrewers, etc.